In this video, we're going to be talking about how students' reading identities are formed and some of the really important factors that go into shaping them. Let's get started. Hi everyone, this is Lee Hall with the Literacy Teachers YouTube channel, and we're all about helping you inspire, motivate, and change how your students read and write for academic success. In this video, we're going to be talking about how students' reading identities are formed, and this is part of a series on reading identities. So if you're not sure what a reading identity is, there's going to be a card that's getting ready to pop up, and it's going to give you some background, general background on the concept of reading identities. Now, the thing to know about reading identities is that how students see themselves as readers, that starts getting formed very, very early on, okay? So by the end of second grade, students are already identifying themselves as being really good readers or really bad readers or really average readers, okay? Those are pretty much the predominant categories. You might hear students use different words, but that's basically the kinds of ways that they're going to describe themselves. And in some cases, this is formed by the end of first grade. Now, students, they self-assign these. So absolutely, right, like parents might talk about their kids as being a certain kind of reader, or a teacher, right? You might talk to a student's previous teacher and they might talk about them as being a certain kind of reader. Certainly, reading identities are assigned to students. But I want to talk to you about the identities that students assign to themselves, okay? That's what this video focuses on. And students self-assign themselves these identities based on things like their experiences with reading. How easy is it for them to read? How difficult is it for them to read? Are struggles with reading really common for them or not? Okay, they self-assign themselves these identities based on their observations of others. So they are comparing themselves, right? And those comparisons are not necessarily accurate. That's important to know. I'm not saying that they are, but it's their interpretation, right? So they're going to make comparisons to other students and see where they fall in terms of those comparisons. Are they just as good as everybody else? Do they seem like they're better? Do they seem like they have greater struggles? And again, that may not be accurate, but that's how students are interpreting things and making some of these decisions about who they are as readers. And then also, they are forming their reading identities based on what their teachers tell them. So if as a teacher, you're telling your students, man, you are a really great reader. You read these really hard books and you just do it so well. They're going to use that to form a positive reading identity. Now, I'm not saying that you tell students, that any of you ever tell students, oh my gosh, you just can't read well, right? I know we don't do that. But in absence of saying, hey, you're really good at this, and if students hear you saying to others that, they're good readers, but they don't get those compliments, right? They don't get that feedback, then they may deduce that you don't see them as a good reader, okay? So they do pay attention to what you as a teacher are telling them and communicating to them about their reading abilities. Now, students are going to form their identities based on what they believe is the criteria for being a particular type of reader. I cannot stress this enough. It is what they believe. It's not what you believe. It's not what I believe. It's not what the research says makes somebody a particularly strong or weak reader. It's what they believe. And I will tell you right now, I've seen students that say they are terrible readers and they have a whole list of criteria for why. And honestly, they're phenomenal readers, okay? So they're very often their assessments. So students' assessments of themselves and how they self-identify as readers is not always accurate, okay? But it's important to know that this is coming from what they believe the criteria is for being a particular type of reader and where they fall amongst that criteria. So what exactly is this criteria? Well, I've done a lot of research with adolescents, and I have read a lot of the research with younger students about how they get to this point where they come up with, I'm a good reader, an average reader, or a poor reader. And here's some common criteria that they often use to determine how they self-identify as readers. So they think about things like how fast they read, how quickly they can pronounce the words, the difficulty level of their questions. So what I mean by that is if they think that they just have these basic questions when it comes to, you read a piece of text and you want to ask the teacher or a classmate a question because you don't understand something, you want some clarification, they consider, right, is this a really basic question that everybody probably knows the answer to? And if so, I'm probably not a good reader. Or is this a very complex and sophisticated question that is going to be hard for not just me, but a lot of other people, and in which case I'm probably a really great reader. So they think about that. They think about how often they get confused with what they read, how easy texts are for them to understand, the evidence that they have over time. So if you sit down with anybody from age 12 on up, and you say to them, well, how would you describe yourself as a reader? And if they say, it doesn't matter what they say, right? They could say, I'm a good reader, I'm an average reader, I'm a poor reader, any of those, okay? So let's just say you sit down with a student and they say, well, I'm no good at reading. I'm very, very bad at it. And if you ask them, well, why do you think that? They can go all the way back to like kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and start telling you where they started gathering evidence to support their claim of who they are as readers. And then they will build that out over time. Okay, so again, right, they've got evidence, they've got reasoning behind this. Actually, I'm hoping I can back up here. Here we go. I do want to point out one thing before we go to the next slide. If you look at this, you don't see anything really in here. You sort of see about how easy texts are for them to understand, but there's not a lot here about comprehension. There's not a lot here about application, right? Like how well can I take what I'm reading and learning and apply it to my life in some way? It's really focused heavily on a lot of very basic skills. So keep that in mind as well. All right, so what to know, what to take away from all of this. Students' understandings of what it means to be a particular type of reader, okay, or what it means to become one, right? So you might have a student that says, I'm a very bad reader, but I'd like to be a good one. And you might say to that student, okay, so what would it take to become a good reader? What do you need to do to hit that goal, okay? They've got very particular understandings of what it means to make that transition. And those are often very narrow understandings of what it means to be a reader. And they're often pretty inaccurate, okay? So that's one thing to know. But the other part of this equation is that they believe, and this is so important, they believe they have a complete understanding and accurate interpretation of themselves as readers. And they also believe that they have a very complete understanding and accurate interpretation of what it means to be a particular type of reader, particularly by the time I would say they're 10 years old on up, okay? They can really articulate that very well. Again, it's often really narrow, it's often very inaccurate. So, what are your experiences with students' understandings of themselves as readers? What do you think about that? Head on down to the comments and let's talk about it even more.